So just so you guys know where you are and make sure that you guys are in the correct room. So you are participating in our annual social business plan workshop. This is our first session of two. The same workshop will actually be hosted tomorrow at 10 a.m. as well. So if you by chance get the itch to want to do this again, or if you know a friend that may benefit from this kind of workshop, we encourage you to invite them in. Part of what I want to share with you guys and what the social business plan workshop is really that there's a goal here, and it's to help folks understand how to apply to the Spark Tank Pitch Fest. The Spark Tank Pitch Fest will actually be in its 8th iteration this year. And the Spark Tank Pitch Fest itself is actually a pitch competition where we raise thousands of dollars every year. This year we have a pot of about $25,000 that available to startup social enterprises. And so really the goal here, most folks sometimes say, well, I've written a business plan before. It's about the same thing. It's similar, but there are some nuances to how these business plans will be graded, and the judges will, if you will, accept only so many to the Spark Tank process. Most years we receive anywhere from 30 to 40 applications into the Spark Tank process. I wish we could accept all of them. But some of them do, while they may get rejected one year, do come back next year and successfully pitch at Spark Tank. And really our hope when we talk about social enterprise and why we do the work that we do and why we've done it for almost a decade now is that we want to spark more social enterprises in our Central Valley, if you will, community members solving community problems through business. And that's really our tagline in all the work that we do. Because we feel like business itself is the backbone to our community and the economy at the same time. But business itself isn't really only meant to generate profit and be money-making machines, but we really see that businesses can deliver value to both our community and to our neighbors. Part of why we started the Spark Tank process and why we've spent the last almost 10 years working with social enterprises was because Fresno often itself makes the top of a lot of lists, but they're not always the greatest list, right? We have things like concentrated poverty. We have things like undrinkable water. There's lists like crime and unemployment rate. And I could go on about these lists, but that's not really the focus of our work. Because we really feel like if we continue to do the same things we've always done, we're going to end up with more of the same. And so this is why we really have posed a challenge from the beginning to churches and to institutions to think of using their own natural talents to then engage community and start businesses that, if you will, tap into the other 90% of the economy of the marketplace. Part of what we've seen over the years is that businesses have really figured out how to tap into that 90%. And on the other 10% that you will, there's this ethereal 10% that we talk about. Since the Great Depression, that number has not really moved from 9 to 11%. And if you can guess what that 10% I'm talking about, it's charitable giving. But churches compete with each other. They compete with other community benefit organizations. They compete with foundations. And sometimes those grants aren't sustainable, those funds aren't sustainable. And so we really challenge our community to think of new ways to use business to solve these community problems. And again, we see business as vital to the community well-being and community transformation here. The other reality is that startup capital is really hard to acquire, and it actually could be really expensive. And so part of what we wanted to do from the beginning was actually take a risk on risky ideas that are innovative, that are creative, that have merit at the same time, that really want to tackle some of our community's biggest problems. And this is why, again, we started Spark Tank. This is why we've spent almost a decade working in social enterprise. And so part of our process looks to reduce the risk, but also increase the equity of these businesses in our community. So how does this work? Really quick, and I'll hand it over to our guest presenter today. So right now, if you guys see, we're right here at the beginning. So today and tomorrow, we have two business plan workshops. They're the same workshop, just one for an evening crowd, one for a morning crowd. There is a deadline to submit, and that's going to be February 23rd. which is 3 weeks from today. By March 5th, people will receive a notice whether they have been accepted to pitch at Spark Tank or not. And our guest presenter today will actually walk you through what we're really looking for in this pitch competition. And then on March 10th, folks will be accepted into a pitch day where folks will then pitch their business ideas to a private room of judges. In years past, Spark Tank was a very large event, 150 folks, up to 200 folks would attend Spark Tank. That's not really happening in a COVID world. And so we've iterated to now implement it as a virtual private pitch fest, where the entrepreneur will pitch to a panel of judges, if you will. And then from there, from the pitch fest, then the entrepreneur themselves will be streamlined into an accelerator program where we will then spend the next 2 months taking their idea from idea to startup in that time span. And this is where their funds will be dispersed to be used in any sort of way to really advance their business. And then lastly, in about mid to late May, we'll have what we're calling right now a launch day. Right, it'll be a celebration of the progress of the social enterprises, but also really, if you will, a public announcement of like, hey, here we are, and let's get to work. Let's change our community together. You get with me here?
Yeah.
I want to make sure to kind of cast vision and for everyone here to understand this is what we're participating in today. So if by chance you clicked on the wrong link and you weren't looking for social business plan workshop, now is your time to exit. But without further ado, I do want to welcome our guest presenter, this handsome man by the name of Alex Hussain. I've had the opportunity to work with Alex for it's crazy to think, almost 5 years now. And so it's been a lot of fun to work alongside Alex and his work. He currently serves a local organization here in town by the name of Bitwise Industries. And Bitwise and has really been fortunate to have Alex, I will say, and vice versa. But Alex himself is just a creative young man, at the same time bright and sharp, and really is just a doer in our community. He's currently working on his 5th social enterprise. At the same time, he was a part of our founding team in building our social enterprise accelerator. I often call him the brainchild of some of the work that our center has been able to spark. And part of what I admire about Alex is he really loves meeting new founders and getting them connected. And by founders, we mean entrepreneurs, right? People who are starting new businesses. And I think another reason why I like Alex so much is because he thinks John Mulaney is as hilarious as I do. But without taking too much more time, Alex, I'm going to go ahead and hand the controls over to you. So let me go ahead and give you permissions and feel free to take the reins. Thank you, Alex.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Carlos. Let's see. All right, everything looks good. Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks to everybody for being here. I'm really excited to be here with you all and share a bit about what I've learned, both from those who know a lot more than I do, and also from personal failure points that I've had in my journey as a social entrepreneur. So let's talk about where we're headed today. We're going to cover a few things today. First up is what social enterprise is and why I think it's a great option for impact and for business. And then we're going to spend the rest of the time breaking down the steps to starting a social enterprise and breaking down each question in the application for Spark Tank. Many of the questions from the application relate to each of the steps, so we're going to do both of those at the same time along the way. And 2 quick notes before we get started. You'll get a copy of these slides in the next day or 2, so don't worry about trying to write everything down. And this is also being recorded, so there's even another way to look back at the content that we're going through. And also, while we're going through, Carlos may have mentioned this, but feel free to throw questions in the chat box as we're going. Carlos will keep track of them for the end, and he may even press pause so we can address 1 or 2 of them that needs to happen in the moment as we're going through. Now, my goal for you today is to leave confident in the next steps for you to build your social enterprise, and also for you to be prepared to apply for the CCT's Spark Tank competition. And so with that, let's get started. So what is social enterprise? Let's get started here with the basics. And why should we care about what social enterprise is or what it can do? We're looking at social enterprise because there are big problems in the world. From the street in our neighborhood to the planet as a whole, our world has a lot of big problems that affect people that we care about. And whether it's your faith tradition calling you to care about this problem, whether you know someone who's facing a big problem in their life, or whether you've gone through painful experiences and don't want others to have to go through that, many of us want to do something about these problems that we see. And we all know most of these problems can't be fixed by a social media post for awareness, a GoFundMe donation, or an afternoon volunteering. And even though those are all good things and they're not bad at all, many of these problems that we're looking at need a solution that, one, makes a big enough difference, and two, makes a difference that can really last. And so social enterprise is a unique model of solving these big problems because it provides the ability to grow as big as you need to in order to address the size of the problem, and the ability to make money so that you can keep going. Now, these are big statements, so let's dive more into what a social enterprise is and what that means. So let's get started with the basics here. What is a social enterprise? A social enterprise is a business that exists to solve a social or environmental problem. And there are two parts here. We've got the social environmental problem and the business. We'll call this the impact and the business, these two parts. And you could say, well, a lot of businesses have a mission statement. So, I mean, what's really the difference? Well, something that separates social enterprises is that they exist because of this problem in the world that they're trying to solve. Most of the time, the problem is the inspiration for the social enterprise to exist in the first place. So something else to remember for all social entrepreneurs out there: the better you are at both business and impact, the more impact that you'll make. So let's talk about both of these here. Social enterprises care deeply about both components, impact and business. And so they set goals for both, they measure progress for both, and they make improvements on both constantly. And some people might say that these two components are two things that don't mix well together, like oil and water. Or they might say that it runs into a game of tug of war where you have to choose whether to focus on business or impact. But in social enterprise, you can shape your model so that the impact and the business can actually complement each other, and your decisions can benefit both at the same time. And the best social entrepreneurs become awesome at solving problems in the world they care about, and also awesome at building successful businesses. So to get a bit more specific, let's look at some types of social enterprises. In a social enterprise, there are three broad categories of how you can go about making an impact. We'll go through a quick definition of each and then hop into some examples to get a real life picture of what it can look like. The first type is the embedded model, where the focus is on the product or the service. And let's use a really simple metaphor. Let's say you're a farmer and you grow vegetables. In an embedded social enterprise model, the vegetable itself solves the problem, probably by someone else eating it. Maybe they are lacking certain nutrients and your vegetable provides the nutrients that they need. The second type is the integrated model, where the focus is on how you run your business. And using the same metaphor, in the integrated model, what solves the problem is how you grow the vegetables and or who you hire to grow and pick the vegetables. Maybe the way you grow your vegetables takes carbon out of the air and puts it back into the ground, addressing climate change. Or maybe there are some local young adults who are feeling hopeless and you're now providing them with a job that they can actually do. And the third type is the integrated model, where the focus is how you give back with what you have left over. So still using the farmer example, you take the money left over from selling your vegetables and use those profits to solve the problem. So maybe you donate money so the schools can buy books for the kids. So these are three basic categories of social enterprises, but let's look at some examples to show what a social enterprise looks like, how it works, and how they solve social and environmental problems. So here we'll give one example for each type of social enterprise. The first example of a social enterprise is Community Music School, founded by Eric and Sheena. They saw that a local junior high student, some local junior high students had little to no access to music instruction, and also saw that overall their after school programs were really lacking. So Eric and Sheena were the program directors of the music department at Fresno Pacific University. So they definitely had a skill set that could address this need. Then they got in touch with the school districts that those students were at and found a way for the school district to pay for the music classes so students didn't have to. So they saw the need of these students And they then found a customer who would pay them to provide these services to the students, so the students didn't have to pay for it. So while they were giving great music lessons, they were also solving the school district's problem of needing to put certain funds towards quality after-school programs. This is an example of an embedded social enterprise where what solves the impact problem is the actual product or service that they're providing. Now, the second example of a social enterprise is Neighborhood Industries, founded by AP and Brian. They saw the amount of people in their neighborhood who didn't have a job and had multiple barriers to employment, who just needed another chance and some professional development. Some of these people were coming out of homelessness, some were coming out of rehab, and some had been out of a job for a number of years. So they started a thrift store to provide affordable goods for residents in their neighborhood and started training and employing these neighbors with barriers to employment. So this is an example of an integrated social enterprise where neighborhood thrift, in the way that they run their thrift store by hiring these certain employees and equipping them, that solves the problem that these employees are facing. So how they're running the business. The third example of a social enterprise is Lana Coffee. So a church in Fresno, California spent some time in Thailand and saw that some of the villages needed access to clean water and also needed people to buy their coffee beans so they could stop having to grow opium to make their ends meet. So they had the idea to buy the beans from these farmers, roast the coffee beans in the US and sell those beans to churches, coffee shops, and restaurants. And then with the profits from selling these coffee beans, Lana has been able to pay for new water wells to provide fresh water for these villages in Thailand. And interestingly, the church first started by trying to start a nonprofit to do this, but it wasn't ever really successful enough in buying as many beans as they needed to. And it also couldn't donate any profit back to build the water wells because there was no profit being made. But once a local social entrepreneur took over the organization and changed it to a for-profit model, he steadily grew it to where it is now, selling over $1 million a year in coffee beans. And honestly, this is a great example of how in social enterprise, getting better at business directly increases the impact that you have. So Lana has most significantly grown its revenue by selling to coffee shops, restaurants that serve a lot of coffee, and retailers like Costco, actually. These customers want craft coffee from a local company for their customers. And on the impact side, in 2019, the water wells they built with their profits will provide 7 million gallons of clean water over the next 20 years. So this is an example of an external social enterprise. So how Lana Coffee uses their profits, solves the problem of a lack of clean water wells in certain villages in Thailand. Now, I should note that Lana doesn't build these clean water wells themselves. They send their profits to a local organization in Thailand that builds the water wells. So most social enterprises that fit under the external model will send their profits to another organization that has the experience and local expertise to do the impact-oriented work. So from these examples, you can see the difference between these social enterprises and a traditional nonprofit approach to solving social and environmental problems. In a traditional nonprofit, you're looking for donors and grants to fund the work that you're trying to do. In a social enterprise, you're looking for customers to partner with you by paying for your product or service that you're offering, which allows you to continue doing the impact work and actually increase your impact as you serve more of these customers. Neither is inherently better than the other, but we're just really excited about the potential that social enterprises have to scale up in size and stay more sustainable over the long run. Now, there are also some differences we can see between social enterprise and the traditional business model. First, there's a difference in why money is made. In traditional business, money is often made because that's the primary goal for the business. But in social enterprise, money is primarily seen as a tool for creating more impact. Now, there's nothing wrong inherently at all with making money and just stopping there. You're likely providing jobs and you're providing services that people want, and those are both really good things. And at the same time, social entrepreneurs would likely see this as a missed opportunity to then go and use that money to make a difference in the world in some area that they care about. Another difference is that for social enterprises, impact is so integrated into the business that it's measured and has goals to hit to the same degree that traditional businesses track money and make financial goals. Social enterprises choose to set goals and measure for both finance and impact to about the same level. And lastly, the origin story is usually different between the two different models. For social enterprises, their inspiration for existing usually comes from trying to solve a problem in the world that they really care about. So again, to summarize why you should consider building a social enterprise, I believe it's because you can grow as big as you need and make the money you need to change the world, or maybe realistically, at least change someone's world. Honestly, I could just end it right there and this would be some amazing motivational speech, or I could turn the next slide and sell you my online course for $27.99, but that's not going to be super helpful for you. And that's not what Carlos told me to do. So I'm going to do neither of those things. And instead, we're going to get started on how we can build our own social enterprises. But how do we get started? And that's a really good question. How do we get started? If you've ever tried to start a social enterprise before, or any type of business, honestly, you know how overwhelming it is to try and figure out everything about your business idea all at once. In my opinion, that's what makes writing a traditional business plan so difficult, where you have to write dozens of pages pretending like you know what's going to happen in the future. In my experience, I found it not to be the most helpful for aspiring social entrepreneurs. And that's because in the real world, you have to do small tests as quickly as possible to figure out if your business idea is going to work or not. And you can't afford to waste a bunch of time. So because of this, I've designed something for you all called the 6 steps to building a social enterprise. Now, this takes the best parts of a traditional business plan and lays it out in a practical and effective way so you can test your ideas quickly. So you can stop wasting time on unnecessary things and also make sure that you're always pointed in the right direction. So, quick question for everyone. Who here has unlimited time to spend on this? So go ahead, throw your name in the chat if you have unlimited time to spend on your social enterprise. Great. So since none of your names are showing up in the chat there, let's figure out the best way to use our time. Now, I mean, I say that as a joke, but this is something almost all entrepreneurs struggle with, whether they're focused on impact or not. What should I be focused on? What should I be doing right now? What should I be working on? My hope is that the content that we're going to go through today will help with that. And the best feedback I've ever heard from someone after going through this workshop was, I didn't really know what I needed to do or focus on, but now I know exactly what I need to do. So I've heard that a few times, so I hope it helps you in the same way. So today we're going to go through a shortened version of the content, but you can get more in depth into every part of this process by joining us at the CCT's Social Enterprise Academy that Carlos mentioned, and also by checking out previous recordings that we did last year. Carlos will share these links on the YouTube links either in the chat sometime tonight or in the follow-up email that you'll get in the next 48 hours. So while we go through these 6 steps, we're also going to be going through each portion of the Spark Tank application so you can present yourself well to the judges in the first stage of the process. Now there's $25,000 going out to social enterprises this year. So listen close and let's get started. All right. So even though you're probably muted, you are maybe sitting by yourself and maybe you're watching the recording of this 3 years from now, I want you to read these out loud with me. So step 1, find a problem. Step 2, talk to customers. Step 3, brainstorm solutions. Step 4, build an MVP. Step 5, improve your MVP. Step 6, find more customers. Okay, there are a few things to notice here. You might notice that the problem comes first and the solution comes later. Yeah, that's totally on purpose. Their problem first, your solution later. Their problem first, your solution later. Problem first, solution later. Problem first, solution later. And I know I'm being ridiculous and pushing it over the edge, but you have no idea how helpful this is and how hard it is for most entrepreneurs, including myself, as we got started. In this process, you don't even really start thinking about solutions until step 3, and we'll talk about more about why later. So also you might be thinking, what the heck is an MVP? I see that multiple times on there. And that's a great question. So that is startup lingo, social enterprise lingo. So welcome to the club. It stands for minimum viable product, and it's basically the simplest thing you can build to solve your customer's problem. And the cool thing about your MVP is that it's the best way to get started and for you to learn about your customer's problem that you're trying to solve. But we'll cover more on that later. The step we're going to spend the most amount of time on is step 1, finding a problem, because it's so foundational for the whole process. it takes a lot of work for this to become second nature for many social entrepreneurs, and because it's the step with the most Spark Tank application questions related to it. So let's get started. Starting off, step 1, find a problem. Remember, we start here. We are starting with finding a specific problem that someone has. And if you came here with an idea for a social enterprise, maybe that you want to put in your application for the Spark Tank, let's take a second to think about that idea. Where did your idea come from and what inspired it? And hopefully what inspired it is a problem that you see someone has or that you have. And now if you can't think of a problem that your idea solves right now, no problem. Let's keep going and the connections may start to form. But before we can go any further, we keep talking about problems. But what is a problem? So here's a few different ways to think about problems that may help. A problem could be a pain point, a frustration, or a difficulty that someone has. Here we're focusing on a point of friction that someone's experiencing and determining that, hey, I think that's a problem for this person. Another way to think about problems is to imagine the other halves of these sentences you might hear. I wish such and such. This would be better if XYZ. Can you believe blank? That's just not right. These are all examples of key phrases that we and others use to talk about our problems and the problems that we see. And clearly, if you want to look at some of the most severe problems in the world, look for examples of injustice, and inequality, and oppression. These are problems that likely tug on our heartstrings the most. And maybe one of these is what brought you here today. Now, to provide a bit more clarity, here are some example problems that I could think of. I have so many things to do every day and I can't keep track of it all, so I end up forgetting some of them. Or another one, I want to eat healthy, but I don't have enough time. Or this one, I have a record, so no one is willing to hire me. Or this one, I can't drink the tap water in my neighborhood because it's so polluted and toxic. So those are a few examples. A quick question for you all. What would you rather try to solve, a broad problem or a specific problem? For instance, some examples of broad problems include homelessness or reducing waste. On the other hand, some examples of specific problems include homeless veterans need transitional housing for 6 to 18 months to help them get back on their feet and qualify for specific services available to them. And many rural schools and apartment complexes can't afford to have their recycling picked up in remote locations, so they have to throw it into the trash. Which one would you rather try and solve, the broad one or the specific one? In my opinion, it's definitely better to narrow in on a specific problem. With broad problems, it's hard to know where to start, it's hard to make a meaningful difference, and it's hard to not waver from idea to idea. With specific problems, you can find a more clear place to start. You can make a meaningful and measurable difference with the problem you've addressed, and it's easier to stay laser focused. So we want to make sure that as we learn more about the problem, we're narrowing in on a specific problem that someone has. And as you may have noticed already, in social enterprise, there are 2 types of problems we have to solve. We have the impact problem and we have the business problem. So the impact problem addresses a social or environmental issue. You can think of it as your cause or your North Star. It's typically easier for people to care about, and it's likely what inspired your idea and inspired you to join us today. The impact problem usually feels like the heart, the mission, or the purpose of the business. It could be a rallying point for your team to remember why you're doing this, what's the purpose. And some of your customers will want to buy from you because of your mission. Not all of your customers, but some of them. On the other side of the coin, the business problem addresses a business pain point. Here, you're finding someone who will pay you for the product or service that you're offering. This is the engine of your social enterprise per se. And the business problem is where you make money so you can stay alive and grow. We actually have a phrase that I like around this idea: no money, no mission. More money, more mission. It gets funny after you say it 100 times, but it's really true. In social enterprise, growing sales will grow your impact. So going back to our 2 main problems here, because we're going to be focusing on specific people, we're going to use these names to help keep it clear: beneficiary, customer. People who experience the impact problem are beneficiaries, and people who experience the business problem are our customers. So with the example of Lana Coffee, the beneficiaries are the villagers who get clean drinking water, and the customers are the stores that buy the roasted coffee beans. Now, your goal is to develop a really, really deep understanding of both problems, business and impact, and then become great at solving both of them. You want to be constantly improving at both understanding the problems and solving them. So, using the earlier example for community music school, the beneficiaries are the students getting music lessons, and the customer is the school district paying for these music lessons. But sometimes the two can be the same person. For example, with the Headspace meditation app, the beneficiary and the customer are actually the same person. The person paying for the meditation is also the same person receiving the mental health benefits of meditating. This can happen this way as well, and either way is totally okay, as long as you can make it work. Same person or two different people, as long as you make it work, either way is totally fine. So how do you find a problem? If finding a problem is so important, how can you make sure that you found one? One of the best ways is by trying to scratch your own itch. Here we're talking about personal experience. Many would say this is the best way to find and solve a problem, whether it's an impact problem or a business problem, because you know the pain point yourself and you know how potential solutions would work or not. Next is what you observe in the world around you. Maybe this didn't happen directly to you, but it's still something you've seen. And another way is by taking the second one kind of a step further and engaging your empathy into the other person's experience. Listening to their stories or observing their actions and empathizing with what you think might be a difficult experience for them. And honestly, empathy is so important if you want to start a social enterprise or really any business for that matter. Empathy is how you step into the shoes of someone else so you can understand and feel their pain point. And if you can't do that, it's hard to build something for them that'll actually solve their problem, whether it's the impact problem or the business problem. Now, we don't have to spend a ton of time on this now, but I wanted to leave you with two simple exercises that are helpful tools for spotting problems. First is to think through your day and recognize different problems or difficulties that you face throughout your day. These could range from things you just don't like doing to things that you maybe avoid, all the way to things that you wish no one else would ever have to go through. These are just a few examples of things to spot. The second version of this exercise is to think about the day or the week of someone that you really care about and try to discover the problems that they face. This could be a family member, someone you work with, or a stranger you encountered as you went through your day, such as seeing a family sleeping in a car or something. So similar to your day, think through things they don't like doing, things they want to avoid, or things they would never want others to go through. And that may lead to discovering some problems that might be worth solving. But even if you can find a problem, how do you find the right problem? How do you know if it's an important problem? How do you know if it's a problem where you can make any money? How do you know if this is a problem that's the right fit for you and your team? These are great questions, and your founding team should definitely think through these early on in the process. So it helps to start with a foundation of self-awareness and empathy. Self-awareness is so key for a social entrepreneur. In this part of your journey, self-awareness can help you find the problems that really tear at your heart and make you excited to do something about, something that's going to keep you going. So you should honestly ask yourself, do I genuinely care about both of these problems I'm trying to solve, the business problem and the impact problem? And then empathy. Again, super key, allowing you to step in the shoes of someone else that you're trying to serve. And you should really be trying to import empathy into every decision and every step of the way for your social enterprise. The next way to tell if this is the right problem is by finding somebody whose hair is on fire. A lot of venture capital investors talk about finding customers whose hair is on fire. Basically, their problem is so intense that if you handed them a brick, they would snatch it from your hands and start smashing it on their head to put out the fire. It's a funny metaphor, but it's trying to help you determine whether this is a serious problem for your customer or beneficiary, or if they don't think it's that big of a deal. But how do you know for sure? The best way is to talk to these customers. And fortunately, that leads us into step number 2 of the process. But first, let me share a quick lesson that I learned. At one of my previous attempts at starting a social enterprise, we spent all of our time for over 6 months talking to beneficiaries who were young people who wanted to learn personal finance skills. And we spent close to 0 time talking to customers, universities, and banks who we thought would pay for it. And as you might guess, we really started to understand how to solve the problem for these young people. But all of a sudden we realized we had close to no idea how the banks and universities were going to pay for it, let alone if they really wanted to pay for it or not. So please, please, please don't forget to make sure you're solving a problem for your beneficiary and a problem for your customer, and that you're learning from both about what they want and what they need. And last thing, before we head into step number 2, I want to give you some questions that you can use in your own time to reflect and see if this is a good problem for you to choose. I've gathered some questions here that should be really helpful. Michael Seibel is the CEO of Y Combinator, which is one of the world's best known business accelerators for new startups, new businesses. And Eric Ries is the author of The Lean Startup, which was a book that really transformed the new business landscape and has helped to shape leading thoughts around entrepreneurship, as well as a lot of the content that you're seeing here in these sessions. These questions were designed for evaluating business problems, but I think almost all of them can help to evaluate impact problems as well. And remember, you don't have to jot all these down. You'll be getting a link to this PowerPoint the next day or two. So don't hurt yourself trying to write down these questions at the speed of light. All right, so question number 1, how intense is my customer's problem? Number 2, how often does my customer have this problem? Number 3, do my customers know that they have this problem I'm trying to solve? And number 4, how many people have this problem? I really love the first 2 questions. So whenever you are thinking of a new idea, a new business, a new social enterprise, ask yourself, how intense is the problem I would be solving? And how often do they have this problem? These 2 in particular are a great mental checklist to run through with any idea right away. Now for the next 4, question number 5, are they willing to pay for me to solve it? Number 6, have I experienced the problem myself? And if not, am I close with anyone who has experienced it? Number 7, can I build a solution for that problem? And number 8, how easy is it for my customers to find me or for me to find them? Now, I would actually run through these 8 questions for both the impact problem and the business problem that you land on. It's really important for you to figure out if both of these problems are worth trying to build an entire business, an entire social enterprise around. And also, just a quick note, the problems that you choose don't even have to be problems that no one else has ever solved before. It doesn't even have to be super original. Just make sure that you're focused on their problem that someone actually has. That's a good problem to solve as you are improving your product or your service, as you're figuring out marketing and sales language and other aspects of building your company. If you're really focused on their problem, more than the other potential solutions they could go with, your competition, they'll really increase the chances that you'll build something that they want more, and they'll increase the chances that they will buy from you as well. So let's take a quick pause there. We're going to dive into a couple questions from the Spark Tank application that have to do with finding a problem. So first up is, why are you starting this business? There's a similar question that I like asking people 3 times. It's, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And why are you doing this? So 3 different questions looking to get your motivation and why you chose this over other options you might have. So yeah, what's your motivation here? Why are you compelled to do this when you could do something else or do nothing at all? And what are you hoping personally to gain from this? So those are some of the things that we're looking for, especially to know why you'll keep doing it and why you keep pushing forward when things get difficult. Second question, what is your vision for this business? What do you see this social enterprise doing down the road? Where do you see the social enterprise going? Where do you see yourself going in this particular social enterprise? And if your social enterprise were to grow to your wildest dreams, what would that look like? And what impact would it accomplish? Third question, what problem are you solving for your customer? And why does your customer want to buy this? Here we're focusing in on the business problem in particular, not so much on the impact problem. And so be as specific as you can, please. Remember, we want to narrow in on a specific business problem. And so one way to do that is to use as many adjectives and specific nouns as you can here, enough so that we clearly understand the problem and what it would feel like, even if we've never actually experienced it ourselves before. Next up is what problem are you solving? Sorry, what social and environmental problem are you solving? So kind of on the flip side here, we're talking about the impact problem, but similarly, paint a picture so that we would know what it's like, even if we've never experienced it ourselves, and use a lot of adjectives and specific nouns. So 5th question, why did you choose this social or environmental problem to solve? And have you experienced this yourself? From what I've seen, when entrepreneurs are more connected to the problem, the impact problem or the business problem, they're just really more likely to succeed. So tell us about the connection that you have to this impact problem and why it's so important to you that you're going to push through the hard times, the challenges, and the impossibly difficult stretches to build this social enterprise. So tell us a little bit more about your connection there. And the 6th question here on the Spark Tank application, what from your experience and background has prepared you to start this social enterprise? This might be the most interviewee question that we have, but building on the last question, do you have the skills and experience necessary to contribute to your portion of the business? If you're going to be responsible for selling things, have you ever sold anything before? If you're going to be responsible for the finances, have you ever kept the books for an organization before? Tell us about the skills and experiences you have that have prepared you to do this. And in addition to that, you may have some personal experience or a turning point in your life that has created this fire in you where you can't not do something about this problem. If you haven't addressed that in the other questions yet, we want to know about that fire too. And then last question from the application in this stretch, if there's anyone else on your founding team, tell us about them and their role in the company. So in the previous question, we got to know you a little bit more. So tell us about any other co-founders you may have who might be starting this business alongside you. What do they bring to the table that you don't already have? And why does having them on board make you more likely to solve the impact problem or the business problem? Why would having them on board make your social enterprise more likely to succeed? So just to be clear on what a founding team is, these are not people who cheer you on, people who agreed to help out from time to time, people you bounce ideas off of. These are people who are as invested as you are, probably putting in similar hours as you, and probably deserve some equity ownership of the company. And if you don't know what equity ownership is, that's totally okay. Reach out to us and we'll walk you through it. All right. Whew, deep breath. Let's transition back into the 6 steps. We are moving into, now we found a problem from step 1. We're going to move into step 2 to give you the basics that you need to start talking to your customers and beneficiaries about this problem that they have. The concept of just talking to people can be pretty broad. So when we talk to customers or beneficiaries, what's the best way to actually do that? And what are we trying to figure out when we do talk to them? Here are a few notes that should help guide this process for you. First, you should only be talking to people who actually have the problem. Right now, you're trying to learn more about this problem that they have, and you only want the perspectives of people who actually have the problem you're trying to solve. So talking to your mom or your best friend or your coworker is not what we're going for here. That is, unless they have the problem that you're trying to solve. And the only exceptions in this situation would be if you're talking to maybe an expert in the area, like a social services worker, if you're trying to serve like lower income families, or a therapist if you're trying to serve people who have experienced trauma. And while those would be incredibly helpful, probably, you definitely also need to hear about the problem from the people who are experiencing it firsthand. So definitely need to be talking to people who actually have the problem. Second, the goal in these conversations is for you to listen, not for you to talk. This is more about you asking questions, not about really pitching your idea. And I'll explain that more in a second. Third, when you talk to them, kind of start the conversation really broad and ask open-ended questions. And this is because you want to let them lead you to their most intense problem in this area that you're interested in. You might assume it's something else, but they may lead you in a different direction and it'd be really insightful for you. So only focus in with your questions as they lead you and you become interested in something specific that they're sharing. And fourth, let them lead you to their problem. Really try to avoid the temptation to lead them to your idea or your solution that you have. And something to note, these super early conversations almost never end in a sale, and that is totally okay. If their problem's really severe and they're ready to pay you that day, that's great. But the main goal in these really early conversations is learning about their problem that they have so that you can understand that really deeply. All right. So in actual conversations with people, to learn more about this problem, you're going to find people who have that problem, and you're going to start an open conversation with them. And to help guide you through these conversations, I've gathered 5 questions from 2 gentlemen named Heaton Shaw and Eric Mijikowski, who have successfully started multiple companies. And I've seen these questions be super helpful for people as they're trying to learn about the problem from their customers. You'll use these questions to open up a natural conversation. So even though you have these list of questions, don't get so stuck on the list that you forget to have a natural conversation. So the first question is, what is your number 1 challenge around blank? And question number 2 is, can you tell me about the last time you had this problem? In my opinion, the first 2 out of the 5 are the most important of the questions. These are going to point you straight to the gold mines of information. In the first question, you're going to have to figure out how to fill in the blank. You need to describe their problem for them in a general way with as few words as possible. So for example, when I was building a personal finance education app, we filled in the blank with managing your money. So we would ask our potential customers, our potential beneficiaries, what is your number 1 challenge around managing your money? So that's how we worded that question. And in the second one, you're looking to understand the story and the narrative around their experience when they experience this problem. Their answer here will give you a lot of context so you can later figure out a good way for your solution to be the superhero in this story per se. So here are the remaining 3 questions. Why was this hard? Have you tried anything to solve this problem? And what don't you love about the solutions you've already tried? Now, these are not as pivotal as the first 2, but they can also be really helpful, especially if the conversation isn't flowing very naturally. The third question is asking them to describe the friction of the pain in their own words, which is super helpful. The fourth question is doing kind of 2 things at once. First, it's giving you a list of competing solutions that you should look into and see how you compare and see if they're good or not. And second, it's letting you know whether this problem is important enough for them to actually have done anything about it. If they haven't tried anything yet to solve this problem, you don't have to give up and find a new problem, but it may be a sign that this problem is not that intense or that important to them. And the 5th question helps you know what you would need to prioritize in order for your solution to stand out against the competition. So right here, they're basically handing you a to-do list of things that they would want to see. And again, with these 5 questions, don't be so rigid or stuck to the list. After you ask one of the questions, the person you're talking to will probably have opened some doors based on their answer, and you should definitely walk right through them. And you should kind of approach this as if you're trying to like fall in love with their problem and be obsessed with it, and kind of approach it in that way. And remember, resist the temptation to tell them about your great idea for a solution that you have like right away. Also, through these questions, they're going to tell you what their biggest pain points are and what specifically you should be solving for them. And when you're having these conversations, a lot of things will become clear that you didn't even expect. You might figure out what to name your company. You might figure out how to word your social media posts. You might figure out places where you could sell your product or your services. There's so many things that could come from these conversations. So listen closely to what they say and use that information to guide all of your decisions. All right, so now that we've figured out how to talk to customers, let's take a pause again and go through some of the related Spark Tank questions. So describe your target or typical customer. So with this question, after you've had a few conversations with people who have this problem, it should be pretty easy for you to tell us about the typical customer you're targeting for your business problem. What are a few common characteristics that they share? Do they all have similar interests? Do they spend time in specific places? Do they have certain job titles? Do they work at certain types of organizations, etc.? And why is this a problem for them, and why would they want it solved? Basically, we want you to show us that you have a good understanding of who you're trying to sell your product or your service to. Next up, describe your target or typical beneficiary. So same thing here, but we're looking at the impact question, the impact problem and the beneficiary. Tell us about them, especially how it relates to the problem that they have. So last one here, do you have any competitors? Are there any other similar businesses that are solving a similar problem? If yes, tell us about them and how you will still be able to thrive regardless. So something to note here, the third question here is not the most important thing that you're going to find out from the 5 questions that we talked about. And I wouldn't say you should spend a ton of time focusing on your competition, but you may learn that some of the alternative solutions that people use, you may learn about them and maybe you'll pick something up. And in addition to the conversations, I would also suggest spending an hour or 2 on the internet looking for potential competitors, just so you're aware of the landscape. From this question, we're really looking to make sure you've done a bit of homework to see what you're up against, both through talking to your customers again and doing a bit of research online. So one thing I would say to keep in mind, when you're looking for competitors, don't just look for companies that look like you and offer what you offer. Look at companies that are solving the same problem that you're trying to solve, even if their solution is way different than yours. Because to the person you're trying to help or trying to serve, they have one problem and they're looking at a bunch of different solutions, even if they all look different. So just something to keep in mind. All right, now that we've found a specific problem and we've listened to people who have that problem, it's time for step number 3, and that is brainstorming solutions. So from what I've seen, entrepreneurs usually come up with ideas in one of 2 ways. They have a light bulb go off in their head as they come up with a new idea, or they see a problem that someone has. And you might know the answer already, but take a second to think about this. What do you think is more likely to result in a successful business? And similarly, which do you think is more likely to have a more significant impact? If you can't guess already from how much we've said these words, from what I've seen, entrepreneurs who start with a problem are ridiculously more likely to be successful. So again, that's why we've ordered it in this way. And so this is part of how we're brainstorming solutions. It's based on these problems that people have. Here's a great quote that I think speaks to this well. It's from Michael Seibel, the CEO of Y Combinator. He says that most entrepreneurs think that their genius and their special sauce is in their solution, but the best entrepreneurs know that their genius and their special sauce is in how deeply they understand their customer's problem. So there's a huge point being made here. Deeply understanding the problem is really the best advantage that you can have. So when you're going to start brainstorming ideas, I would say the first thing you should do is look back at your interview notes from step 2 for inspiration and to guide your brainstorming from all these conversations you've had with customers and beneficiaries. Now you've learned about exactly what their problem is. You have the target to aim at. You should have a much clearer picture of the specific problem that they're experiencing. And here are a few more questions for you to ask yourself as you go through the interviews, as you go back and look. What do all these people have in common? What do I notice is most important to them? What's the specific problem that they're experiencing that I can pull from their responses? So I would say that's the first thing you should do when you start to brainstorm. Next up is the whiteboard brainstorming technique, personal favorite of mine. Here you'll grab your co-founders and some creative friends and find a massive whiteboard. Be sure to bring some food and drinks with you and try to have fun. The first step is to write the specific problem you're trying to solve in the middle of the whiteboard. From there, try to come up with as many ideas as you can on how to solve this person's problem and write them around the problem in the middle. And then after that, you choose the solution idea that you want to date first. And that's your starting point. So I know we use the word date there and it's kind of funny. We have a phrase that we use that will likely be kind of helpful for what you're thinking about this. Don't marry your current idea, date your current idea. So your idea, your solution is just your best hypothesis for what you think is going to solve this problem. So be open to seeing that idea grow and change over time. And the last exercise that I recommend, you can try something called the 10-star exercise created by the founder of Airbnb named Brian Chesky. You can Google it to learn exactly how to do it, but essentially you think of something so crazy awesome that it would blow your customers' socks off in the way that it solves their problem. And then you work back from that until you reach something you can actually do. So you go from, flying them to the moon to a really awesome transportation experience. It's helpful to get you thinking outside the box about how you can leave a lasting impression on your customer. So I'd recommend checking out that one too. So there's a few ideas for brainstorming solutions. Let's take a quick pause again, go over it. There's a few questions that correlate with the Spark Tank application to the third step. So one of them is, do you have any different ideas for a social enterprise? So this is one of the optional questions. You don't have to answer it, but we're really looking at the way that you think about business ideas here. Maybe you have a different solution idea for the same problem, or maybe you have an idea on how to address a completely different problem. Either way, we want to hear about it if you do have one. And answering yes to this question is not necessary to score well in the Spark Tank or to get accepted, or even to be successful in entrepreneurship in general. But I do want to share a quick story about a Spark Tank participant in the past and somebody who went through the Social Enterprise Academy. Her name is Monisha Edwards. She came in with one idea around an internship program for lower income youth getting job skills. But then during the Social Enterprise Academy, she shared her other idea about selling candles as means of promoting mental health. And she ended up going with the second idea with the candles, and she made it so big. She was on national television on the Today Show for her candle business. So clearly that worked out for her. So again, you don't have to have a second idea or a third idea, but if you do, we want to know about it and definitely keep it in mind. So that's the question that relates to brainstorming solutions. Now that you've brainstormed some solutions and chosen the first one that you want to date and experiment with, it's time to start building something. So it's time to build what we call your MVP. But first, what is an MVP again? MVP, startup jargon for minimum viable product. This is the most basic solution you can possibly imagine that technically solves their problem. But I mean, the goal is not for it to be bad. The goal is for you to be able to move fast. So because of the speed you'll be moving at, your MVP won't be the ultimate end product of your dreams. That would take too long. And at this stage, it would waste a lot of your time, honestly. So when you think about an MVP, I would say a good example is, let's say the problem you're working on is a transportation problem for someone. The MVP, minimum viable product, would be a skateboard, not a car. You can build a skateboard much faster than you can build a car. And that's valuable because it means you can test it with your customers or your beneficiaries way sooner. So we're looking for speed to learn, essentially. So what's the point here? What's the purpose of an MVP? Honestly, the main purpose of an MVP is to learn even more about the customer's problem, but this time based on their actions, not just based on their words. So this is pretty important to remember. This stage is really helpful to see if people will put their money where their mouth is. And we all know that actions speak louder than the words. So this is what this part of the process is for. And the second main purpose of an MVP is to learn as much as you can about whether your idea for a solution solves their problem, and to be able to do that in the shortest amount of time possible so you can keep moving very quickly and not waste any of your time. If you let's say you spent a year building your first version, your first MVP, you get to run one test per year. But if you spent 1 week on every version of your MVP, in the same amount of time, you could run 52 tests. So that's 52 chances to learn and change your solution to better solve their problem. Now, there's a hidden key that I do want to mention here that's helpful to know as you're trying to start a social enterprise. Most new businesses that fail don't get crushed by competition or even really run out of money. Most new business ideas that fail, they fall apart because the founders lost their sense of momentum and just decided to give up, that it wasn't really going to work. So part of what's really valuable about this process is that moving quickly with your MVP here really helps to maintain that sense of momentum and keep you and your team feeling hopeful and focused and like believing that you can make it and that it'll work. So to give an example of what an MVP can look like, to move away from theory and into a practical example, I have a story that I really like. So before Instacart and other food delivery websites and services, there was a founder who had an idea for an app that would provide a grocery delivery service on a regular basis. And she could have spent months drawing different mock versions of the app. She could have spent tens of thousands of dollars building the first version of the app. She could have planned out every move she was going to make by writing a 50-page business plan. But she knew that if she went any of those routes, she wouldn't really learn anything about what customers actually needed. And she wouldn't learn anything about who was most excited about this product that she wanted to offer. So instead of doing those things, she went to a single mom support group and she offered to take their money and go and buy the groceries for them and then deliver it to their homes all herself by hand. So how did she input their orders if she's going to build a website? At these meetings, she asked them what they wanted and wrote it down on a piece of paper and with a pencil. How did she receive any changes at last minute that they wanted to their order? They would text her cell phone. How did she get feedback from her customers? She watched their body language and their nonverbal cues as she made the deliveries. She would also ask them, what could be done better? And then she kept track of who kept using it and who eventually kind of dropped off and didn't keep using it anymore. So by doing this, she learned an incredible amount about what they needed and the problem she was solving for them in just a few weeks, without large amounts of money spent or time wasted by maybe building this really beautiful app or buying special equipment for the business. And then when she did go to eventually build the app, she knew exactly what her customers needed because she had worked with them so much and ran so many different experiments to learn from them. She knew all of the features that were needed and which ones were kind of unnecessary or distracting from what they needed. So I love that story. That is hopefully an example of what can be done as an MVP. So what are some tools that you can use to build your own MVP? These are just a few examples I've seen work really well. The first tool is actually yourself. It's called the concierge MVP. Basically, whatever you have available to you and your time. So the concierge style of an MVP is where you make them feel like they're using an app or a service, but really you're just doing everything manually behind the scenes or behind the curtain. And one example could be a reminder service, but you're just manually texting the person at certain times. Or it could be a delivery service, but really you're the one picking up the items and delivering them. This is a method this is an MVP method to start testing your idea for a solution like right away. And you get to experience every component of it yourself. So you really get to learn so much about the solution and about their problem because you're experiencing all firsthand. The next set of tools are existing tools that you have at your disposal, especially ones that you're familiar with. These could include, Microsoft Office products, Google Drive products, Google Forms or other survey tools, physical tools. I don't know, maybe a saw or something, or a PowerPoint slideshow. I mean, depending on the type of business, whatever existing tools exist. So you can get creative by piecing different tools together to kind of make like a mock product. Because remember, it's less about the product at the beginning and it's more about like testing to see if this will actually solve their problem. And then there's some services you can use that I would consider to be like a demo MVP. They're really neat, and I've usually used them before multiple times, especially if you're going to have a website or an app as part of your business. I'd recommend checking out Marvel app, or if you're a little more advanced, maybe Adobe XD. Both of these are simulators for websites or apps, and they're really easy to make designs on. So you can take your app simulation or your website simulation and physically hand it to somebody or send a link to somebody, and they can try it out on their device. And yeah, it's just really, really quick and useful way to build it up quickly and cheaply. And Marvel app actually has a free version that we used, so I'd recommend checking that out. And with all of the tools available to you here building the MVP, remember your goal is to take what they've told you about their problem and go build the solution towards that target. So, all right. This is the moment you've all been waiting for. Here's your challenge that I am giving to you all. Your goal is to build your MVP within 1 week. And yes, I said that correctly. 1 week. If you really want to move fast and learn quickly and increase your chances of success, I really recommend putting this together as quickly as you can. I mean, would recommend a week. Sometimes it takes a little time to build up this skill and get faster. And it also depends on how many hours per week you can dedicate to it. But I'd say a good goal would be 1 week. And so with this challenge, here's some requirements for your MVP to give you an idea of what you're looking to build here. So whatever you build, keep in mind, make really sure that you're trying to at least technically solve their problem. I'd also recommend that you spend as little money as possible for the first go at it. You can learn a lot without spending any money in the first week or the first couple weeks. And you can always spend more in the future when you know more about where to best spend that money. And this is a funny one, but it's really okay for your MVP to be a little bit embarrassing. Not that it has to be atrocious or terrible, but it could be a little bit embarrassing. So if you offer to have a service performed for someone and they say yes, and then you show up yourself to do it manually, they might be off put a little bit and think it's funny or odd, but just stay the course, focus on trying to learn about their problem based on their behaviors and their actions, and then also see if this is a good idea for a solution. And keep in mind, early on, the goal is to learn based on their behavior. So yeah, it's tempting to want to like impress them with bells and whistles and stuff, but at the very beginning, that's really not the main focus of what we're going for here. So that's it for the process of building your MVP. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you all can build in a week. And when you get to this stage, I'm really excited to hear about what you learn in the next step, which is step number 5 we'll talk about right now. So step number 5 is improve your MVP. So now that you've built the first version of what you're going to test with real customers and real beneficiaries, let's figure out how to test it and then make it even better. So the first part of this step is testing it. So here are some of the best practices that I've learned from others on how to test your MVP so you don't get in the way and ruin your learning opportunity, essentially. So after you've taken a week to build your MVP, you're going to take your MVP to some of these potential customers and potential beneficiaries, the people that you've been talking to, and you're going to let them use it. So remember, we're only testing on people who have the problem. So these are probably people that you talk to in step 2, but only people who have the specific problem that you're trying to solve. So here's a few notes on how to have them test it. When you have them test it, don't say anything. Just hand it to them. No instructions, nothing. You really want to see if it's simple enough for them to figure out on its own, because eventually you would want your customers to be able to figure this out without you having to be there. If you can, try to test the MVP in a context where your customer would usually have this problem. So the test is as real as possible. It's really in that narrative and story of where they're experiencing it. And as they're using your MVP, listen to what they say. Watch their facial expressions and see which parts are the hardest for them to figure out and which parts light them up and give a sense of like relief. You'll probably gain more truth from their nonverbal cues than you'll learn from the words they choose to tell you during the test or afterward. So pay close attention to those. And then also to pay attention to, while they're using it, see if your solution is actually solving the problem that you designed it to. If they struggle to solve their problem with it, that's really helpful feedback, and you can go back with that in mind. This is kind of funny and super difficult, but the first few times you may have to watch them struggle in confusion or give up completely. You'll feel pretty bad if this happens, but that's okay. You just have to resist the urge to help them so that you can get a real like valid test results, basically. Okay, so that is how I'd recommend testing the MVP. And now that we've tested it, the second part of this step is determining what you're going to change in order to improve your MVP. So after you run a few tests with a few different people, You're going to take everything into account, their feedback, what you observed, and anything else that you gathered. And from there, you'll decide what the most important improvements are to make in the next week. Now, keep in mind, when you're deciding how to improve your MVP, there's a few things you got to balance. You got to maintain a balance between what they said, what they did, how their face reacted, and then whatever insights came to your mind during the moment or after that. So there's a lot of things to factor in, and that's kind of where this becomes more art than science, I guess. And after you decide what improvements you're going to make, take another week to implement those changes, and then go back for round 2 of testing. So we're staying with the fast pace of learning, improving, learning, improving. And now that you've got this process down of testing and making improvements, you just keep doing this, week after week, or a short period of time after short period of time, getting closer and closer as it gets better and better to the solution that will actually solve their problem. And one day, hopefully, that they start paying for, because it's good enough for them to pay for it. So as you go through this process, you might ask yourself, when is this no longer an MVP? And when is it ready to sell? And it's pretty interesting, actually. The answer is it's no longer an MVP and it's ready to sell when you offer it to someone and they say yes. It is mind-blowing, I know, but in all seriousness, it's really not something that needs to be overcomplicated. Don't get stuck on terminology here. MVP, beta, version testing, blah, 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 blah. Just keep it simple. At the end of the day, you're making something that people want and you're going to sell it to them. So don't get stuck on the terminology. Just keep improving your MVP until somebody is willing to pay for it. And with that, we are ready for our final step in the process, number 6, which is find more customers. And this is where things start to get really exciting and have the potential to take off. Now you've built something, customers are starting to pay for it. It is time to find more customers. So that leads us to a very obvious question. How do we reach more people? Like we had maybe a couple people or a dozen people that we're talking to, but how do we find more people who have this problem? So some things to try and find out, where do these people who have this problem hang out, in person or online? And these people, meaning people who have the specific problem, remember, where is their attention and where do their eyeballs spend time, and who has their attention? There's a few ways you can do this. You can talk to your existing customers, ask if they know anybody else who would be interested. You can think about where your existing customers spend time and then go visit those places. And you can think about who has your existing customers' attention and then how you can get there to find more people like them. So that's just a few ideas. Another way to find more customers is through social media. Now, we all have a million opinions about social media and its impact on society and everything. But from the perspective of trying to start a business, this is actually a really incredible tool. Social media allows you to engage in conversations with potential customers at a level like we've never really seen before. And so there is something that you need to know, especially at this point in your process. If you only use social media as a megaphone, you're doing it wrong. So social media, this is basically if you're only posting and only talking and not doing any listening, I would say it's kind of, you're wasting an opportunity. Social media is really, really valuable because of how it can help you hear from others that you would have never met before. And you can actually engage with these people that you've never met, listen to them and ask them direct questions. So you can go through some of the steps of this process through these virtual relationships that you're developing. And to find the right people who have this specific problem, you can just look around different hashtags, different keywords, and popular pages that are related to what you might be building. And last, to find more customers, we have sales channels, which is just a fancy way of saying you want to build a lot of roads to connect you and your customers. And once you find more people that have this specific problem, you can start to figure out ways to sell to them more efficiently. That might be a social media page that links to your store or to your website, or a local store in person where a lot of your potential customers visit. or it might be a consultant or a salesperson who is connected to a lot of people who have this problem. Those are just a few different examples. And if you're interested in learning more about sales channels, Google it, do some research, or reach out to us so we can have more conversations about it. We don't have time to do a deep dive here. But yeah, so let's press pause again, cover another few questions from the Spark Tank application. So describe your social enterprise and what it does in 1 to 2 sentences. Be sure to include your intended impact. So by step 3 or 4, and definitely by this point in the process, step 6, 5 or 6, you should hopefully be able to describe what your social enterprise is and what it does in a sentence or 2. But I mean, that's not always super easy. So if you do need any help, here's a helpful framework from Irma Olguin, the co-founder and co-CEO of Bitwise Industries in Fresno. She says, we do blank for blank who blank. And this basically reads, we do product or service for type of person who has this unique characteristic. So here's a couple of examples. We deliver groceries for working single mothers who don't have time to shop for all the food for their family. Or we clean work uniforms for chemical plant workers who are legally required to keep their clothing chemical and odor free. So just 2 examples of how to explain your business or social enterprise in a sentence or 2. It's a really helpful framework, and I've started to use it myself. Next question, describe how you will make money. You should have a decent idea of how you're going to do this, we hope, no matter what stage you're at. But obviously, the further along you are, the more clarity you're going to be able to answer this with. So tell us the one or the few ways that you are planning to make money, how you know someone will pay for that, and how any plans you have for growing that over time, maybe literally how you're planning on exchanging the currency, just to describe that process to us. Next question, how will you find your customers and how will your customers find you? This is pretty self-explanatory, but where can you reach out to your customers in a setting where they would be open to hearing about your product or service? And on the flip side, how can you create pathways for your customers to find you? How can you get yourself out there? So it can be the other way as well. We're kind of looking for your thought process and also your craftiness on these answers. Next up is, have you sold any products or services yet? This really helps us see where you're at in your journey. It is totally okay if you haven't sold anything yet, but if you have, that's definitely a certain level of validation from your customers. And so try to make this a bit more than just a yes or no answer. We want to know as much detail as you have here either way, whether you're close to it or you have had a few experiences, we want to know. And finally, at what point are you in your progress today? Have you talked to any potential customers? Have you made any sales? We just want to know where you're at and what you've learned so far. It would probably be a good idea to maybe use the 6 steps described here as part of your answer to help share where you are in your progress, but we want to know where you're at and what you've learned. All right, so we're going to cover one more section and we're going to do a brief bit on finance, since obviously money is critical to keeping your social enterprise alive, and also since a few of the Spark Tank application questions deal with finances. So we're going to cover a few different types of costs and then give you a helpful formula, and then we'll wrap up from there. So the first type of costs are costs per sale. Variable costs are what they're usually called, but that's just business jargon for your costs per every sale you make or every unit that you sell. So here are a few examples of some typical variable costs: materials, time and hourly wages, and commissions to people who sell the product for you. If you want more detail here, you can Google variable costs to get a more comprehensive list of examples. And I mean, just as an example from your life, think about how much you pay in gas every month. It's directly dependent on how much you drive your car. So if you don't drive, your gas costs are 0. Variable costs, or these costs per sale, they go up and down depending exactly on how many units you sell. So that's another way to help differentiate. And this is helpful to figure out because you need to make sure you can sell it for more than it costs you to make it. It sounds obvious, but this is something that quite a few businesses struggle with. And lastly, something you need to factor in is paying yourself. It just makes your business a lot more likely to succeed if you've factored in paying yourself. And it's more likely for you to continue working on it. You don't have to pay yourself from day one, but it should be factored into the point where you will eventually be able to pay yourself or pay other people to do these operations and tasks that you're doing to get started. So the other type of costs, we have our ongoing costs, or what's usually known as fixed costs. That's just business jargon. Fixed costs is just business jargon for your costs you have to stay open for business, whether you sell 1,000 units or 0 units. These can include renting office space, insurance, renting equipment or machinery, and salaries. You can Google fixed costs to get a more comprehensive list, again, of examples of these. And then for a similar example from your life, think about how much you pay in car insurance every month. It basically stays the same no matter how much you drive, just so you can have your car and drive it. So that's like an example of a fixed cost. So again, these types of costs stay the same no matter how many units you sell. At the beginning, you'll want to keep these as close to 0 as possible. Skip a lot of us, I've been there myself, you can get tempted to get a fancy office space or, different things. And at the beginning, you really want to get what you need to get your idea off the ground. So you want to stay as skim as possible. And you definitely don't want to forget to factor in these fixed costs when you're figuring out how many units you need to sell and how much money you need to make. Unfortunately, there's a way to calculate that, and that's called break-even point. So the break-even point basically helps you determine how many units you have to sell in order to cover all of your costs. So the equation this is the simplest equation that I could find. So you take your fixed costs and you divide it by what comes out of your sale price minus your variable costs. So you take your sale price, subtract variable costs, and then take that number, and then fixed costs divided by whatever comes out of that. So we have an example here. If the sale price is $100, variable cost is $80, and the fixed costs every month are $845. What would the break-even point be? Either you can do some quick mental math or a calculator, or we can just hop through. If you guessed or calculated 43 units, I think it comes out to 42.25, but you can't really do 42 because then you're not covering all your fixed costs. So it has to be rounded up to the nearest whole number. So that is a helpful equation to figure out how many units you need to sell. And it's also a helpful equation because you can adjust any of those numbers and see the impacts it has on your business. So if we increase our fixed costs or if we cut our variable costs, how does that affect how many units we need to sell? So it's a helpful equation. All right, last section of Spark Tank application questions here. How much does it cost you to produce your product or service, and how much can you sell it for? So kind of 2 parts here. We're looking at the variable costs, or the cost per sale for the first portion, which is, again, the list that we went through. And then how much can you sell it for? So we just want to know some of your thoughts, whether you've tried selling it to people or whether you've found similar items in the market. We want to just see your thought process there on how much you think you can sell it for. How much money do you need to get started? So maybe you need to buy some materials. Maybe you need to pay for some insurance. Maybe you need to pay some people some hourly wages. So we want to give us a list of some of these items, and then also kind of the total number that you think you need to get started, and just a little description of each of them and how you'd use them and how long it would last you. And then the last question is, if you were to receive investment from Spark Tank, how would you use it? So related to the last question, but we're looking to see how can we best steward the $25,000 into these different businesses. So what exactly would an investment from Spark Tank provide for your social enterprise? What are the actions you would take, and how long would that money be able to last you? So a few more questions that aren't related to any of the steps, and we are getting close to the time for some Q&A. One question that we think is really interesting is, have you tried starting a business before? If yes, how did it go and how did you grow as an entrepreneur? So we're just looking to know about your entrepreneurial spirit and history, and what are some of your experiences with selling things. There's a lot. I mean, I've learned so much from all of my attempts at starting a business, especially the ones that failed the hardest. And so we want to know about the things that you've learned and how you've grown as an entrepreneur. If you have any advisors, partners, or other people that are helping you but are not on your founding team, just tell us a bit about who they are and how they'll contribute and why they'll help you be more likely to succeed either on the impact side or the business side or both. Next question is, if you've created a legal entity for this social enterprise, what type have you started? Sole proprietor, LLC, etc. This is a little bit of like a progress check. So we just want to see where you're at and what model you chose to go with. And then if there's any other information or analysis you'd like us to know, please include that here. So this is kind of a catch-all. If there's anything else that we missed or that you want to communicate, feel free to include that here in this question. All right. Whew. Here, big exhale. I saw Carlos exhaling as well. All right. We have gone through, covered a lot of ground. I think I couldn't see it super well, but I think there's a number of questions that came in, and I will turn over to Carlos to facilitate our next segment here.
Yeah, well, I guess we want to throw it up to those of you present here. Any questions maybe from the Spark Tank application process, even tied to what Alex presented today? Part of our goal here, again, is to hopefully clarify the Spark Tank process and the application to apply for Spark Tank, but at the same time, maybe there's some burning questions that weren't answered here today, and so we want to make sure we take time to do that. So you can either ask that out loud or feel free to submit that in the chat. And maybe Alex did a great job and maybe we don't have questions. And that's okay too.
I doubt it.
All right. I see clapping hands here. All right, Alex. John or Margaret, did you guys have a question there?
Well, I was just wondering, neither one of us very experienced with business. My thought was to do some kind of either a tutoring service for second, third grade children who are just not learning to read. I'm a credentialed teacher. And I know at about third grade, if you are not reading, you are never going to keep up at school. So I assume there's a lot of parents who...
Sorry, Margaret, I accidentally pressed mute on your screen. Did not mean to do that at all. I apologize.
Yeah, sounds like a great idea. I'm excited.
Hold on, she wasn't done. That was my fault.
So that was one thing. Or the other thing I've thought of doing is offering tutoring for high school algebra students. I happen to be really good at helping kids who are afraid of math understand it well enough to at least pass the algebra course, which is they have to do to graduate. And I'm sure there's a lot of parents who are kind of sweating bullets because their 15-year-old is not getting it and they want him to finish high school, and he may be the first in the family to ever have done that. But those aren't products. And I'm not being a business person, I'm having a hard time translating this develop a product into, I'm selling this probably to a school district. Maybe they have something in their budget for this, maybe they don't. I kind of don't think the parents would be able to afford to pay for it because these are probably going to be a lot of mostly low income parents, a lot of them possibly.
Alex, if you don't mind, maybe can I speak to that? Just because
yeah, please.
Models similar like to that come through Spark Tank and even in our social enterprise ecosystem. I think there's two ways to do this, right? So you mentioned, you want to serve folks who maybe be of low income, right? And so this would challenge your pricing model, right? If maybe I can't charge too much, right? Part of what we've seen entrepreneurs do and realize like, okay, maybe I can't do one-on-one tutoring, but they can do small group tutoring 2 to 3 at a time, right? And so that's been a simple solution, I would say, to that. On the flip side, to schools and school districts potentially paying for this, you know, I think normally I haven't seen too many schools pay for things like that, but I think it is possible. I'd say more likely in something like a charter school or private school system who have a little bit more flexibility and funds to spend dollars that way. But this isn't for me to say, no, a public school would not pay for this. But I mean, and these are my two thoughts here based on some of the other models that have kind of had a similar approach to who they're wanting to serve and, you know, essentially the service you're providing. Alex, would you add anything to that?
I think you hit a lot of the points. I think that's a fair frustration that it sounded very product oriented, but I think, yeah, you've spotted a problem that these children have that we could classify as the impact problem. And then you're hopeful or wondering that there's a business problem that could fund and pay for these classes because of obviously the financial need there. So, I mean, yeah, I guess we could have a conversation about it. How many conversations with the different contexts you have in the school districts or different organizations have you had about opportunities for grants or other funding sources?
I haven't looked into any of that yet. I've been working full time as a teacher, but the school I'm working at is closing. So I'm looking at other things I could use my expertise in.
Absolutely.
That's great.
The other thing I think of, Alex, you mentioned community music school earlier, right? Like for them, it was an equity problem, right? They realized that students in certain bands in town did really well and others at the same level performed poorly. And this is mainly due to private tutoring. But again, private tutoring is very expensive. And in the same way, we see, I'd imagine, a very similar academic achievement disparity because of tutoring available to these populations. So I think there's a case statement there to be made. And you're mentioning, you know, schools are really having a problem with their students achieving in math, or even you mentioned reading levels. You know, we look at all the research when it comes to third grade reading level. And if a student is not at reading level by third grade, they are exponentially more likely to end up in prison or end up in any negative situation after age 17. And so, yeah, again, I think there is a case to be made there, but again, it's figuring out, I'd say, one, the pricing model, and two, really understanding who's going to pay for this. And like Alex said, I think it's talking to more people. I'd love to chat more about that too, Margaret. You know, my background is in professional development and parent engagement with school districts across the country. And so a little bit different, but, you know, even still working with school districts, we found our niche to really be able to grow. And it was based off of asking a lot of questions. What would you pay for this? Who would pay for this? Right. And, you know, are there more people like you that would pay for this?
Yeah, I looked at buying a Kumon tutoring business. Have you heard of Kumon?
I have not.
It's a Japanese-based company that does math and reading tutoring in storefront buildings, in, you know, commercial areas, and you buy a franchise basically. But it's a tough one because you can work your tail off and make nothing for a couple of years. It's just, you have to have really intensely involved parents. What I heard was it works best in Asian neighborhoods where you've got these, you know, the stereotypical tiger mom who wants her kid to be the top of the top of the top. Those people are dedicated enough to have their children there every week, but it doesn't really work anywhere else. But my heart is to help parents who want to help their kids succeed in school. And there are some parents who really don't care. They wouldn't put in the money. I think also that if a parent is at least paying for a portion of it, even if there's a school district investment in it, that's going to make them more serious about getting the kid there and getting the kid to do the homework that he gets given. You know, whereas if it's total free handout, it's just going to be, yeah, well, we'll get there when we can kind of a thing. So, you know, but maybe, yeah, I should maybe a small amount by tutoring in groups would still make it viable financially. A small amount per parent would still make it possible for them to afford it and for me to not starve.
Absolutely. Well, we look forward to exploring, even in hearing some of how you're exploring that question, Margaret. But I would say, I think Alex has kind of given some tools there to maybe start the conversation, and maybe some leads there will develop as more conversations are had.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it sounds like there's two paths there as well. So there's the pathway of working with the kids. If you want to, basically volunteer some of your time to try tutoring them, kind of test and see what works best. And that would be, we talk about MVP. That's like you just sitting down with a kid and trying, certain things that you've built these skills over time. And then the other side, having initial conversations with different funding sources. Could be the schools, could be there's a number of things that it could be. It's also possible that there's no funding available in a school setting, but there is maybe some people who want to pay for it, want to donate to that. So, I mean, it's possible even a nonprofit would end up making the most sense there if people want to donate to a 501c3. So, yeah, I think I feel the heart that you have for these students. And I think that there's probably a business problem that could pay for it. And just, having some of those early conversations and knocking on those doors.
Okay.
Can I share a thought that I've got that why I wanted to get on this?
Absolutely.
And that's that I'm a counselor by profession, and what I found recently is working with an organization that helps men to get out of basically sexually sinful, like pornography and adultery and those kind of things, and helping them get out of that and into really restoring their marriages. And what I'm finding is that statistics are showing that 60, 70, 80% men use pornography, even pastors, even people who have been in churches for ages. And yet the challenge is, how do you go up to people and say, do you have this problem? And how do you, and so I'm having to look at how do I, because I know it's a huge problem. I know that there are many spouses obviously who want their husbands out of that. There are many husbands who want to stop it. There are many churches who want, those kinds of, they want help for the men in their churches. But again, it's like, how do you find people who are willing to say, I've got the problem and I want help. And I like what you said, Alex, about, I can't remember how you said it, but it was somewhere in there about, do you have experience yourself? And it's like, there are definitely some things that I could share, if I went into churches and began to share my own experiences and then what God's done in my own life to bring healing and bring actually really victory. And so maybe that's a part of it, just being able to go to churches and share. I don't know. But it's like, I mean, I've worked for organizations, that are nonprofits, and I've also tried to have just a business on my own, basically a for-profit business that just never really put out very well. But a lot of what you're saying here, I didn't know, and so I'd really like to make something because I really believe that that this is a huge problem in our society. And I'd like to concentrate on our city and helping change the city. So I don't know exactly how to do those things, but I'm excited about what you shared tonight, Alex, because I'll use those steps and say, is this really viable, and who else is doing it, and how? And I'm already in the process of talking to pastors and to try to find out, do you think people in your churches would be willing to say, I've got a problem and I want help? And so I don't know if you've got any suggestions there, or just basically follow your process and go through it.
Well, yeah, I do hope that it is helpful, and those questions could be helpful. I think, like you said, sharing a personal experience is a really great way to open up like the vulnerability for somebody to be able to admit. That's definitely a tricky thing when somebody has a problem, or A, doesn't think it's a problem, or B, is afraid to talk about it. That definitely adds a lot of difficulty. Yeah, so you're absolutely right. I think there's a church, I think I know that the Well Church in Fresno has a regen program,
Right.
and that program is not specific to some of the issues that you're talking about. It does include them though, and
Right.
so yeah, sometimes those groups that have multiple people who are struggling with different things can all come to. People feel less embarrassed, I guess, maybe to come to that because it's not obvious what they're struggling with, or maybe there's already existing groups of people that you can talk to. But yeah, it's definitely, you know, one of the questions is, you know, how can you find people who have this problem and how can they find you? A lot of that lives on the internet. Maybe putting yourself on the internet is and finding, you know, unique and creative ways to do that is a way to reach these people that you're trying to reach. Yeah, it is definitely tricky, but I think there's ways you can get creative for sure.
And Alex,
oh, go ahead. What?
I was going to say, Alex, you may have found this in your conversation in financial education. Sometimes, you know, you yourself as the entrepreneur, John, will identify a problem in the community, but the community doesn't always know it is a problem or it's not a pressing problem for them, if you will. You know, we have programs that work, you know, financial literacy, that develop financial literacy program in churches and other community benefit organizations. But it really takes a person getting to the bottom, if you will, of their hole to really understand, like, oh, I am in financial chaos, even though, you know, they might be in a negative net sum every month, but their credit is, they have a credit card to offset it, you know, until their credit card may be maxed out or such. It really isn't an issue because they're making it to the next day or to the next month. And so kind of what Alex is saying here, right, is finding that problem. But again, I think you may identify it, but other folks might not. It's like, I have 10 other problems that are more pressing than that one right now. But in reality, that one might be the cause of the 10 other problems, if you will.
Yeah.
So
the other thing is, how do you, you know, with something like mine or even with Margaret's, you know, if you're doing tutoring, or for me doing counseling, it's like, how do you, I mean, it could take, it can take months to get somebody to a place of real success. And that's not going to happen before March 24th. And so it's like, you know, is there, I mean, I guess we could present to you this, you know, this is where we're at, you know, in the process, and just submit that, and kind of see what, and just kind of submit that, because I don't know, there's no way to really hand somebody something and saying,
here's my product.
Here's my product, and because it's something that it's going to take them a while to really latch onto. That in some ways, I mean, most of them will admit that they have a problem, but then oftentimes they don't want to do the things that are going to take to really resolve the problem.
So keep in mind, you know, 3, if you will, categories that the judges will look at when they're, it's a grading or evaluating a business proposal in the Spark Tank Pitch Fest is innovation, new idea, is it solving something that maybe wasn't solved before, feasibility, will they be able to make money? Will the business be able to make money? Does it have a funding model? Is there a revenue model, if you will? And then the last one is impact, right? What kind of impact will it have in the community? And is it well thought out socially and or environmentally, right? And so keep that in mind as you do write up a proposal. And again, Alex has listed the questions. Hopefully he's also given you some content, if you will, to really help develop your response to the question. I did stick a link in the chat for you guys. That includes all the social enterprise resources that you guys will have, that you will need to submit your proposal. If I can really quick, Alex, I'm going to share my screen.
Yeah, please.
I'm going to take over the screen really quick, just to give you guys an idea of what we're looking at in terms of, like, where do I submit my proposal? There is a link on our website that's actually going to take you to this page here. Can you guys see my screen?
Barely.
It's really tiny.
It's really tiny. Oh, that's better. Yeah.
All right. So when you guys submit the proposal, and I'll go to our website to show you where this template is. and where you can find that. But all we're really looking for: name, business name, phone number, email. And there's going to be 2 sections where you're going to be able to click a file. So you're going to have a written portion of the business submission, and then also a video portion of the application. If I go to our website here, cttfresno.org, you guys will actually find the actual template here with the questions that Alex listed, but in just kind of an organized format here. So we ask, and it has suggestions as to how long your responses are. That's usually a standard, if you will, to the applications that we see. And you have it divvied up between questions for the written section and questions for the video submission section. And then simply, again, you will come to this link, which if I go back to our own page, you guys will find a little Spark Tank application button here on our page, which will then take you to this guy right here. And we're trying to make it as simple as possible for you all. But again, Alex and I are here to help you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And so if you guys have questions, feel free to email us, call us. We're happy to help in this process, especially as you have questions maybe about even just questions on the application, like, hey, Carlos or Alex, I don't really know how to answer this, right? Can you help me, right? I think there's a little bit of help that we can provide along the way. The only other thing that I'm going to share here is just to remind you guys, proposals, we are expecting them to be turned in by February 24th. So you have about 3 weeks to submit that proposal. And then your pitch day, if you are accepted to pitch, is going to be March 10th. And I would say that really brings us to the end of our presentation. Alex, is there anything else you would add here?
Yeah, real quick, just I think kind of related to John's question. I think if anybody, you know, obviously I went through a long process of the 6 steps and where you could get to, and, you know, we're talking about sales channels and things. But, you know, a lot of people who are applying for the Spark Tank and get accepted to pitch are just in the idea stage. Maybe they're in step 1 or 2. So we laid out those 6 steps so that, 1, it could be helpful for you, whether that's next week or 2 years from now. But also as like a way of categorizing some of those questions and providing some content, so you have some language and some ideas of how to answer those questions. So you don't want anybody watching this live or the recorded version to feel like, you know, they shouldn't apply because they're not that far down the steps. If you're just starting, if you just have an idea, we still want to hear about it. And we still will assess that based on the everything Carlos said, innovation, et cetera. So really want to encourage, if you've got an idea, we want to hear about it.
Mm-hmm. And the reality is, you know, I'd say a good amount of our applications over the years have simply been ideas, and then they use the dollars that they receive in the Spark Tank process, and then the time and the coaching that they receive in the Social Enterprise Academy to bring that idea to life. And so there is space for this, and it's okay to not have it all figured out. And again, I think businesses in general are figuring out as they go. And so we want to be able to create, if you will, a safe space. And we use terminology like fail fast, fail small, and fail forward, which if you realize maybe this isn't going to work, well, maybe the next thing is going to work. But let's make sure that you figure out what doesn't work on the front end when it's less costlier and you haven't expended an enormous amount of resources, time, and energy on those things. And we want to find those out sooner than later. And Alex does a great job in really laying out that process and fleshing those things out along the way.
So the academy is for those whose proposals are accepted, is that right?
That is a good question. So so proposals that are accepted into the Spark Tank process are, if you will, on top of the award that they receive, are scholarshiped into the Social Enterprise Academy. We then do open up space for a total of 10 businesses in the academy to participate. There is a cost for folks of $500 who would not receive a Spark Tank award. but we do provide a discount to those who do apply to Spark Tank and may not get accepted, or that do apply to Spark Tank but aren't accepted as pitches. We would then offer a partial scholarship, if you will, to the Social Enterprise Academy.
We really thank you. This has been really clear. I've never thought of myself as a businessman, but I think you're absolutely right. We really are. And so I appreciate what you shared. And I mean, in a lot of ways, it's pretty simple. You know, the steps are all there. And so I really appreciate what you shared with us tonight.
This is totally on a different subject, but would you know of anyone that could help us evaluate whether what John wants to do would be better done as a nonprofit or as a for-profit enterprise? Because he's looking at nonprofit, and I'm thinking, well, maybe that's not the best format.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's something we could help with. That's something we could talk a little bit more about. I think we're looking at feasibility both of either or. And so I think there's pros and cons to really starting a nonprofit, pros and cons to starting a for-profit entity. And so as you sift through those options, I think you'll get more clarity as to which one is going to be the best model for you.
So would that be, we would just email one of you and just ask for some help on evaluating that? Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay.
We can set up a time to chat, and I say do that sooner than later. Because closer to the deadline for submission, everyone's going to be doing about the same.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the difference between, you know, for-profit or nonprofit, a lot of it can depend, I think kind of what we were talking about for you, Margaret, your idea too, like depending on which business problem that you can solve. So if you can find that the people who are going to participate in your program have the money and want to spend it, then maybe a for-profit model is what makes sense. But if you're looking for donations, or if that's the business problem that you end up being able to solve is more of a donation based, then maybe nonprofit's the model. So I think understanding nonprofits and for-profits and the pros and cons is super important, just to understand the tools you have available to you. And I think at the end of the day, it's really going to come down to who's going to pay for it and what type of entity are they going to be paying. Now, I mean, nonprofits can charge revenue, can charge for products and services, but you know, there's just some pros and cons to look at. But I think the important thing to figure out earlier on would be, you know, who's going to pay for it. And then I'd also say, whenever I have people who come to say, should I do for-profit or nonprofit? I say, talk to Carlos. So that's that's what I tell people.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating for me because there is an agency in town that, I mean, we live in Kingsburg, and there's an agency in town that is actually built to fund, you know, services for the people of Kingsburg. And so I know somebody who's getting, you know, basically $75 an hour for all the counseling that he does. And so that's available. So that
he's being paid by the group of guys that are funding this project.
No. He's paid by this agency.
Oh, the agency. Okay.
So
it seems like there's
what that would be then. It would be, well, I guess that's the funding for it.
I know what you're talking about that.
Yeah. So let's chat a little bit more, John and Margaret, and we can find some of those ideas out. And I look forward to
thank you. Good. We'll let you go.
Oh no, I was going to ask any other questions. I know I see some other names on the screen here, so I want to make sure we answer questions before we close our time tonight.
Yeah, feel free to throw them in the chat or unmute yourself, and we got a few minutes left that we can take to cover anything that's remaining.
Mm-hmm. I'd say great job, Alex. I think I'll thank you for your time again. Always a pleasure to do these kind of workshops with you and folks on the call. I hope as well you guys have also enjoyed and benefited from our time with Alex. Couple things. We will send you an email following up, likely tomorrow, that will include the template for Spark Tank. It will include a recording, the recording of this workshop itself, if for some reason you want to go back and hear Alex a little bit more. And then 3 will also include Alex's PowerPoint as well.
Okay.
And then you'll have as well included our contact information on how to reach out to us.
Oh, good.
I think, folks, we appreciate your time this evening. Really thankful to be able to do this with you all. And hopefully we see your names on proposals for Spark Tank.
Cool.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.